So this is it. I'm going to talk about this molecule for the rest of the time that I have here with you. Glyphosate, 3 syllables. Glycine methylphosphonate, glyphosate. It's a very tiny molecule that you can see perhaps in the right-hand corner up there, and you're going to see it on every slide, so you can't escape it. Very small molecule invented in the late 50s, 1950s, by a chemical company called Stauffer Chemicals in the USA. Stauffer Chemicals was in the business of cleaning up industrial pipes and boilers of the mineral deposits that deposit on the sides of the pipes and the boilers. And you can't go in and take them out, you have to use a chemical. So you use a chemical product that will basically grab onto atoms and ions of metals. And if you find a really, really good one, then you patent it. And glyphosate was patented, got a patent in 1960 for Stauffer Chemicals, because it is an incredible descaling agent. That's the jargon word for what it does. It's a descaling agent, a demineralizer. It basically grabs onto metals and puts them back in solution. And it's an incredibly broad spectrum demineralizer. It basically grabs onto all metals in a very powerful way. It's a really, very, really wonderful product. So 1960, well, the word gets around because within a few years, it was known that that molecule kills all bacteria. And it was also known very quickly that that molecule kills all plants. And that was interesting to another chemical company, which was not particularly in the business of agriculture, but they decided to make a herbicide of it. And so they repatented the molecule. They bought the molecule, of course, and they repatented it not as an antibiotic, it kills bacteria, but as a herbicide, because there's a lot more money to be made from a herbicide. So glyphosate was patented in 1969 as a herbicide. And it is an amazing product, as it was an amazing demineralizer. It is the perfect herbicide. It is called a non-selective herbicide. It kills all plants. And it is very powerful too. And it works in many different ways, but the accepted theory of it, the way it works, is that it binds to the metal. This is a protein molecule. Proteins are incredibly complex molecules. Long, long chains of amino acids folded in a particular way to do a particular job. You have 100,000 different kinds of protein doing the job of being a human being in your body. 100,000. Very complex molecule. Most of them are called metalloproteins. We also call them enzymes. And they work because at the center of the molecule, in the center, which I have here in gray and blue, there is an atom of metal, which is why they're called metalloproteins. That atom of metal allows for them to move, to twitch, and do the work. So these metalloproteins have an atom of metal in the center, and I just explained to you that glyphosate was invented to bind to metals. So if you have a molecule of glyphosate next to a molecule of protein, which has an atom of metal in the center, the molecule of glyphosate will stick to the metal. It will steal it, so to speak. And the molecule of protein does not work anymore. So the accepted way that it was found that it kills plants is because there is an enzyme in the chloroplasts, and perhaps some of you know that chloroplasts are really cyanobacteria, so we are completing the loop. In the chloroplast, there is an enzyme called EPSPS. It's a part of not a very big pathway, biochemical pathway called the shikimate pathway, and there is a particular enzyme there that has an atom of manganese in the center of the protein, and glyphosate loves manganese. Suddenly, if you have molecules of this chemical inside the cells of the plant, inside the chloroplast of the plant, that enzyme stops working. And that enzyme is part of the pathway, the shikimate pathway, that makes those 3 amino acids at the bottom of the screen, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, the aromatic amino acid, plus all kinds of other molecules that are absolutely essential to the normal functioning of the plant. And that shuts down. So when you have glyphosate inside the plant shuts down. No more proteins, no more all kinds of other molecules. The plant dies within a few days. It's an incredible chemical, an incredible herbicide. It works extremely well. There are many, many other enzymes that are affected by this molecule as well. And you can't read that, it's much too small, but you have to take my word for it, or you can do your own research. Many, many enzymes, like I said, most metalloproteins, all metalloproteins have that atom of metal, and glyphosate loves metals. So it took 5 years for the chemical company Monsanto to do their homework and formulate the chemical glyphosate into a herbicide called Roundup. And when I was a graduate student at the time, Roundup was the new kid on the block. It was the perfect herbicide. It had no toxicity whatsoever. Remember that enzyme in the shikimate pathway that is in the bacteria and in the plants is not in the animals. Animals do not make those aromatic amino acids. Animals don't have the biochemistry to do that. Animals are quite retarded, biochemically speaking. We absolutely do not have the capability of making our own proteins. That's why every day you eat proteins. Otherwise, you won't last very long. So Roundup is invented. It's extremely safe. It absolutely cannot have any effect on animals, including humans. It's a perfect herbicide. It's non-selective. It kills plants, all plants, very powerful, and it degrades very fast in the soil. It's basically biodegradable. It's like you spray the weeds and a few days, a few weeks later, it's gone. Ideal. Well, that was 40 years ago. In the last 40 years, since you're a naturalist club, you'll be interested to know this, since you are interested in the big animals above ground. What I didn't tell you is that the nematodes that I studied are 80% of all animals above ground, below ground. The animals above ground are really negligible in terms of biomass. The animals below ground are much more important. So we have discovered in the last 40 years that, of course, the bees are affected. Another point. Animals are, and perhaps some of you may recognize yourself, animals are basically a long feeding tube, like those nematodes. And some animals have appendages, like legs. You can have 2 legs, or 4, or 6, or 8, depending on what phylum you're in, or wings, or fins, something to move, to go and get your food. But basically, an animal is a long feeding tube full of bacteria that are digesting the food that the animal takes in. When you eat, you are feeding the bacteria in your gut. And then the bacteria feed you. They have a name. We call it the microbiome, and I'm going to come back to that. So the bees have a microbiome, of course, and are disoriented. The earthworms feed mostly on bacteria, and of course they are affected as well. We definitely know that it gives the fish a very severe case of diarrhea. It kills basically all amphibians. we're talking agricultural concentrations here. We know what it does to birds and mammals. Of course, we have a lot of data on mice and rats. So, it kills plants. A herbicide, you spray on the weeds because a herbicide kills plants. So you're not going to spray your crops or your garden with a herbicide, you spray your weeds. So if you have a garden or a field and you spray your weeds before you plant, then you can expect some residue of the chemical in the soil and probably also in the crop or in the vegetables that you grow after that. There will be some chemical residue of that glyphosate molecule in the crop. But nothing like this new technology that was invented in 1996. This is a game changer. This is an incredibly successful technology, okay? It has revolutionized agriculture. Roundup Ready technology has revolutionized industrial agriculture. There's absolutely no doubt about it. This is a genetic engineering technology where basically a gene from a bacteria was engineered into the crops using a gene gun, a small machine that looks very much like a hairdryer. You shoot the pieces of DNA that you have worked with, and you shoot them into the plant tissue, hoping that some of them will find their way into the nucleus of a plant and integrate into a chromosome of the plant. Then you disaggregate the tissue, you plate it on some kind of antibiotic, and the survivors will the survival will be multiplied using all the proper plant hormones into a new crop. You have a successful event. The plant is surviving, you can multiply this plant and make it into millions of acres. Dr. Moore told you that today we have about 500 million acres of genetically engineered crops, 90% of which is engineered to be sprayed with Roundup. So an incredible success. This basically shows you the success of the technology. This is the percentage of corn and soy and cotton. Sugar beet is not on the graph, it would be exactly the same curves. Starting in 1996, this is the beginning of the technology, Roundup Ready technology. Soy and corn the first year, and then cotton and sugar beet within a few years, all the way up to almost 100%. Basically almost 100% of corn and soy and canola and sugar beet is Roundup Ready today, is being sprayed with the herbicide. Roundup Ready means that the plant is resistant to the herbicide, so you don't need to bother about spraying your weeds before you plant. You plant, never mind your weeds, and that gives your weeds more time, a few more weeks to come up. And when your crop is up a foot or high or so, then you spray and you get your weeds that way. And you sprayed your crop, of course, but that's okay because this is presumed to be completely safe, remember? Non-toxic, period. There is no way it can be toxic to animals. So, Roundup Ready crops have revolutionized industrial agriculture. This is a field of corn, and you can see that it is being sprayed with this molecule glyphosate, with the herbicide Roundup. And the crop will stand, and all the weeds will die. And this is being done for soybean, corn, canola, sugar beet, and cotton. And I think this is what Dr. Moore refers to as Frankenfoods in his speech. So if you spray weeds, you should expect some residue in your crop later on. If you spray your crop, you should expect residues in your crop, of course. But you should expect a lot more, because you are spraying your crop after all. It's not a little bit of residue in the soil that goes into the root system and the plant. You are spraying your crop. Not only that, but because your crop is resistant to the herbicide, it's perfectly okay to spray more than once. You spray as often as you need, within limits, I suppose. So it's perfectly normal for a crop to be sprayed twice, possibly more. So the residues are going up in the crop, okay? And a almost surprising study, fact, showed that when the crops are sprayed with the herbicide, they are resistant to the herbicide. But when they're sprayed with the herbicide, somehow they are depleted of minerals. So this is for soybean, but it also applies for the other crops. So in the grain of soybean, you have less sulfur, or less zinc, or less iron, or what have you. Sometimes a lot less. So your crop is depleted in certain minerals, and you understand why, because they have been sprayed with a chemical that grabs onto minerals and takes them out of solution, so to speak. So this is Roundup Ready, an incredibly successful technology. It's basically, like I said, almost